You are listening to Women's Running Stories, where exceptional women runners share inspirational stories about their running experiences.
So my name is Chantel Erickson, and I'm located in Lethbridge, Alberta, which is up in Canada. We're sandwiched between British Columbia and Saskatchewan and just above the Montana border. About an hour, I'm an hour from the Montana border, just to give you a little bit of reference of where I am.
Yes, in this episode, you're going to hear the running story of Chantel Erickson, who is Canadian and she is also an ultra trail runner. But before you hear more from Chantel, I want to welcome you to Women's Running Stories. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of this podcast. Thank you so much for being here. You are in for a treat. Chantel's story is, it's powerful, it's inspirational. It is amazing, and she is terrific. So I'm thrilled that you are here. A quick note up top here, I do want to let you know that Women's Running Stories now has a newsletter. It comes out every Thursday. In it, I share updates about what's going on in the podcast. I share some notes from my own training. I share some observations about running and racing. And I also share something that another woman in the running world is creating for women runners. That could be a podcast, videos, a book, a newsletter. There are lots of terrific resources that other women are creating for women runners, and I highlight one every single newsletter. So please check it out and subscribe. I will provide a link to how you can do that in the show notes. You can also go to Substack and look for Women's Running Stories and find the newsletter that way. And thank you so much. Now, on to Chantel Erickson's story. In addition to being a runner, Chantel is, in her words, a multipreneur. And that is in addition to being a wife and the mother of 2 children. Chantel runs her business, Be Well Chantel, and under the umbrella of that business, she has many offerings. One of them is Baby Mama, where she offers pre- and postnatal fitness services, and she is a running coach. Chantel is also a financial advisor focused on helping women with financial literacy. She's a life insurance broker. She is also a freelance writer, and one of her primary outlets is Canadian Running Magazine. And in addition, Chantel is a reoccurring co-host on the Community Trail Running podcast with Adam Lee. And I want to thank Adam so much for introducing me to Chantel. I actually got to be a guest on Adam's podcast late last year. I will link to that in the show notes. And afterwards, he suggested Chantel as a guest for Women's Running Stories. And of course, I said yes. He connected us, and here we are. Chantel is terrific, and I really appreciate Adam connecting the two of us. So, today, Chantel is thriving in many ways. But things for Chantel were definitely not always like this. A little background here. Chantel was raised by her grandmother and her mom, who had Chantel just as she was finishing high school. Chantel did not connect with her father until much later in life, and she's going to talk a bit about that in her story. Over the course of her life, Chantel has experienced many traumas, and her upbringing and early adulthood was pretty chaotic. And then running came into her life. And it provided a steady foundation for many positive changes. What Chantel discovered and how it all unfolded is what her story is all about. So let's get to it. Chantel is going to start at the beginning when running first entered her life. Here to tell her story is Chantel Erickson.
So my college roommate in my third year, had the same name as me, and we spelt it the exact same way. And I remember the first day that, I'm living in the dormitories and I'm getting a new roommate, and it was kind of move-in day, and this very beautiful, tall, blonde, extremely bubbly personality person walks in, and I thought, oh no, I hope this match is going to work. And, within the first few days of being my roommate, she asked me if I worked out, if I went to the gym. And I said, absolutely not, I don't. And she said to me, well, why not? And I said, I I don't feel comfortable in the gym. I've never really felt like I belong there. I wasn't an athlete growing up. I was kind of your academic nerd, played piano, that kind of thing. And she was like, well, I'd love for you to come with me. And she just actually extended an opportunity to go to the gym. And I remember the first thing she did was hit the treadmill, and she always wanted to warm up. And the first time that she invited me to go, I didn't even know how to use a treadmill, turn it on or anything. I didn't know how to stand on the side and kind of wait for the belt to start or anything. And so thus began my intro to running. And she sort of taught me how to run, walk. And I'll never forget the longest amount of time that I could run was 30 seconds before feeling totally exhausted. And then eventually that turned into a minute, turned into 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And it didn't take me very long. Within the first month or two, I was kind of breaking into this whole sport of running without really knowing I was. And you know, at the time I didn't realize it, but it really gave me the feels. Like as soon as I started going to the gym, I started to change as a person. Up to that point, I was a confident person, but when it came to my self-image, I was always pretty insecure. At that point, I was probably around 35 pounds overweight, and just, had kind of been in that space, since my last year of high school. So accepted it. That's kind of who I was. And I started to feel different. It's almost like the endorphins were having an immediate effect on me. And I think the whole regimen of getting up at 5 a.m., because that's when my roommate and I hit the gym, getting up at 5 a.m. and getting into this routine, which was so not normal for me. I was very spontaneous and didn't really have a super big rhyme or reason to what I did. And so the running was creating this structure in my life. And having grown up in a very chaotic upbringing, traumatic kind of home, and having so many things be unpredictable in my life, it almost was building this predictability for me. And so I would say that it was an early effect of my mental health that I had yet to know was occurring, was the effect of it. And it just kept me getting up every day and going back for more. And then I started to see physiological changes kind of by accident. I went to, buy a new pair of pants. And I remember just getting my regular size and putting the pants on, and they fell off. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I must have lost weight. Like I wasn't after it for any of that, but I literally went from, I think I was like a size 11, 12 in my waist down to a size 7 or 8 in the span of like 3 months in running. It was quick, and my body was just feeling really good, and I was sleeping better. And yeah, that's what kept me coming back for more. And this is pre-social media era, so there was no Instagram yet or anything like that. And so there was really nowhere to learn about things except for to just sort of like step into it and kind of, fall into it. And so from there, it sort of evolved. And I found a Garmin watch at a garage sale, a big clunky thing on my wrist. And I think I paid $25 for it at a yard sale and signed up for my first 10K. I started with a 10K race. My beginnings of running, besides having my roommate kind of get me started, were very lone ranger. And so I wasn't a part of any running groups. I didn't have any other friends that ran. So I was very kind of a loner sport for me, which I really loved. And I still love it for that reason at times. But yeah, I signed up for that race. Nobody convinced me to do it. I think I heard about it on the radio and I thought, that sounds cool. I should totally do it. I have no idea what possessed me to do it. I just felt like I should go try that. And I showed up, and I remember standing there feeling really kind of out of place. People were chit-chatting and talking about all things running, and I was just kind of standing there like, like some people were warming up, and I was like, what do I do? Like, do I do a warm-up? Like, do I stand here? Like, how does this go? I had a pair of gray Walmart shorts on and like just some like blue tank top. And God only knows what running shoes I was wearing. And it was really super awkward, to be honest with you. And then I was out there, and I remember people cheering for me. And that was the first time that I experienced that. It was like, oh, you're doing great. Yeah, you're almost at the finish line. And it was so contagious. It was like, wow, it was like I was being filled in my soul the entire time. And I was looking around at the sites. It was at the river bottom in a community that I lived in. And and I remember turning and seeing the finish line and the big arch that I was going to run under and a bunch of people surrounding it. And it just literally felt like a magical experience. So nobody convinced me to be there. I convinced myself. I really didn't know what I was getting into. I was just kind of like running on the high of like what the sport was giving me at the moment. And then it kind of just progressed. And I got a dog, and I began running with my dog on the back country roads in Saskatchewan into the wide open spaces and skies, kind of watching the sunrise. And I remember actually kind of having like an emotional moment with myself. I remember stopping and kind of, staring at the sun rising. It was an early, probably 5:30 in the morning. And I remember just feeling a great sense of overwhelm. Like, I'm here, like I'm doing this. I never saw myself as an athlete. I was raised by an athlete. My mom was a track star and actually got pregnant with me in her last year of high school, which ended her track career. Um, and I never saw myself as being someone that could fit into those spaces. And I remember having like a very transformational moment at around age 20, 21, thinking like, if I'm doing this, then there really is no limitations on my life. It like began to expand my self-belief, and it was like a light bulb went off inside my soul. And it was like, if this is what I've accomplished in this short period of time, and now my roommate's no longer here motivating me to do it, I'm self motivated. Um, it just became like this entry into a different version of my life. And I feel as though my first race that I signed up for, just even signing up for that 10K race was a big accomplishment for me, to believe that I could stand on a start line and exist with other people and not have to hide, which is what I spent a lot of my life doing, was hiding the home that I grew up in, hiding the fact that I was really sad inside and struggled with depression, but coming up and showing up to school or my workspaces with this complete other personality. And I spent so much time suppressing myself that it was the first time that in racing, when I crossed my first 10K finish line, that I was like, oh my God, like I, I'm becoming somebody that I didn't even know that I could become. After sort of my 10K race, I started reaching for the half marathon distance. And I signed up for a half marathon in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in Canada. And I had a baby. So I had my son. And I began training about 12 weeks after I had him. I was so attached to the sport. At that point, I was running 6 days a week and running. And so I ran as far as I could in my pregnancy to 27 weeks until it didn't feel comfortable anymore. And then I had my son, and I really wanted to return to it. My son was colic. I had really bad postpartum depression. We lived far from our families. My husband's family lived in the US. My family lived 2 provinces over. So we were really on our own. And so returning to the run was so important for me, because it was a sense of keeping myself, like having something that was mine. It sort of allowed me to, just keep my identity. And it was an hour or so away from being a mom, just for a minute, to sort of like restock my tank. And that became a really important mental health piece for me. And so got into half marathoning. And I remember I crossed my first half marathon finish line. And I had no idea about any times or anything like that. But at that time, they actually published results in the newspaper. I'm dating myself now. They published results in the newspaper. And a friend of mine that had run that race said to me, "Hey, did you know that you placed whatever my position was pretty decently?" And I thought, I have no idea how placements work or whatever. And I think I finished my first half marathon in like 2 hours and 3 minutes. And this is just kind of like after having a baby. And my son was like screaming all night in the hotel the night before the race. It was a really difficult evening, but I still got up and I tackled it. And I was like, oh, wow, cool. I didn't realize that there were like results, published. I literally had no idea about this whole world. I just showed up to race. And so it kind of progressed, and I did a couple more of those. And then, my whole thing was like, if I feel great at the finish line, then I think I'm ready for the next thing, like the next challenge. And so that's where it's kind of like the gym. It was like, if I was leg pressing this, then I guess it's time for me to put another weight on the end, kind of thing. And so I kind of got to that space in racing. And so I did some half marathons, and I was feeling really great at the finish line. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to reach for the full marathon. And at this point, I quit my desk job. I actually went back to school and became a personal trainer. I had lost my second baby and I had to deliver my daughter Jalen halfway through my pregnancy as a stillborn. And and at that point, running became even more pivotal for my mental health. And so I found a fellow trainer that I was working with at a gym that I was brand new to, a brand new personal training and fitness instructor. And I told her, hey, I'm going to go and do a full marathon. And she was like, you know what? I've always had that on my bucket list, so I'm going to do it too. And so we kind of like, we didn't train together, but we supported each other in our training, showed up to that, finished it. I remember crossing the finish line, and there was a gentleman that was being handed a bouquet of flowers. And he was the first place finisher for the entire marathon. And he kind of looked at me as I crossed, and he had this bouquet of flowers in his arms. And I said to him, congratulations on placing first. And he's like, oh, thank you so much. And he was like, tell me, was this your first marathon or like your 10th marathon? And I was like, no, it was my first. And I remember him saying to me, well, then it was a personal best. And I felt kind of lit up inside that, you know, the first place finisher of the entire race is giving me this like affirmation, you know, and I have a photo that I have framed with him. And yeah, and I thought that was really cool. And so I just felt like I had, you know, my spirits were really lifted after that race. And so I moved provinces after that to the province of Alberta, and I joined a run club, which intimidated the heck out of me. I was out for a run one day around the lake, and a girl that I became friends with kind of accidentally who was out running, we sort of befriended each other. She was like, hey, you should totally join the local run club. And I was like, absolutely not. I've never group run. Like, that freaks me out. No way, right? Like, and at now I was fitness instructing for a local studio. So a lot of people were getting to know me as a spin instructor and a lift instructor. And this girl showed up to my classes and kind of kept bugging me about it. So I was like, okay, she's bugging me about it. I'll show up. And I remember being like so unbelievably uncomfortable to just even show up at the running store and do this group run. And I remember they gave a little speech before every run, like they gave a little running tip, and like they were talking about what the route was that day. And I remember the owner of the store, Sean Pinder, he said, hey, if you came with earphones today, I really strongly encourage you to take them out and just get to know the person beside you. And like, you know, that's why you're here. And that's why I didn't want to go to like a run group. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And so I did. I took my earphones out, and I remember this girl coming up on kind of my shoulder, and we just kind of kept cat and mousing the entire time. And so she asked me what my name was, and we just created this conversation, and we ended up becoming really great friends. And we started training together for another full marathon. And then another person in the run group started talking to us about ultra marathoning. And we were like, what's that? Like, we had no idea. And she's like, oh, you guys should totally come out. I'll take you out for a run in the trails one day and I'll show you. So we showed up one day, you know, my kind of my marathon club running friend. And we show up to the trails one day, and this girl takes us out, and we thought we were going to die. We're like, this is so hard. Like, what the heck is this? Like, and I'm wearing my street, my road shoes in the trails, and I'm like slipping down these rocky, you know, single track, whatever they were. And it was so foreign to me. And I remember thinking like, I could only really think about the, you know, 30 feet in front of me at a time. I was just trying to survive it. And we're climbing and we're descending and we're doing all this stuff. And I just remember thinking like, this is wild. Like, this is so cool and different. And after my first trail run, I was hooked. I was like, I don't know what I just did, but whatever that was gave me an even greater feeling in my soul. And that was my entry to trail running. And then I just, I signed up for a 50K with my friend. She's like, we should sign up for a 50K. So I remember that year we backpacked the Bob Marshall in Montana together. We ran a full marathon in the spring, and then we ran a 50K in the fall. And we just kind of crammed that all into one year. And I thought, oh my gosh, I just had the best year of my life. Like, it was so great. And I felt like I was on top of the world. So, I mean, that's how it really began. It was very organic. It was kind of this step to that step to this step. And then boom, here I am in the world of ultramarathoning. I didn't really know much about my personal trauma and its effect on me until later in life a little bit when I got deeper into my counseling sessions. But I think the one thing about longer and longer, and having been growing up with a trauma background, I believe people like us really suit the sport of running so much, because running is very much a sport of mental toughness and fortitude and being a great problem solver, especially ultra marathoning. And so as I went further and further in distance and had different challenges in ultra marathoning, such as, my very first 50K was the year where we had what we call they were the Waterton fires. And so our Rockies were on fire. And so my very first race had like really bad smoke conditions, and it smelled like a forest fire, and really nobody should have been running that day, but some of us showed up and did this race. I was like, I trained so hard, I'm not going to show up. And so that was like a big challenge and hurdle within my very first 50K. And then, fast forward, and other hurdles were starting to come up in racing. And it was like, I would face these challenges, and then my entire being would just figure out how to overcome them. And I think that's what made me attached to the sport and want to go further and further, is I was actually seeking harder and harder. And like, basically, like, I'm kind of curious to know what will break me and what will break my spirit as a person, because nothing was breaking me. It was just causing me to go deeper and use my life experiences and the things I had already overcome in my life in a very practical manner. And so I was almost feeling like my childhood had a purpose now. It was like, oh, okay, growing up in an abusive home and growing up without a dad and working 3 jobs in high school and putting myself through post-secondary and paying the bill all by myself, and all of these things that I had done, I was having a place to display that person. And I wasn't the fastest girl, but pretty much I felt that nobody could outrun me mentally, because I had gone through and overcome so much in my life. I'd sat in a jail cell when I was 15. I had, gone through probation. I had my grandmother had to leave me, and my caregiver leave me in my grade 12 year to go get work because she was out of work. She lost her job. And so I finished raising myself in the 12th grade. And there were all these things that I had to do. I was in a car accident in high school where I should have died, but for some reason I walked out of it, even though my car was totally totaled, and I was hit on my driver's side door. All of these things, it was like, I have a place to prove to myself that I can be held back and I can be challenged, but I can't be broken. Like for me, running is very spiritual, actually. And so when I'm running, I feel like I'm in that space with myself. It's where a lot of my deepest thoughts come, and where I do a lot of processing, especially on my long runs, right? Like when you're an ultra marathoner, you're doing one of several things. Your brain's either totally off, like it's just so off, and you're just like thinking about, oh, there's a rock, and oh, now we're going downhill, and oh, my left IT band kind of feels like it's acting up. Like you're just kind of like, you're not really thinking about a ton of things except for like that very sparse moment that's constantly changing and evolving. And sometimes you're going through a tough time in your life and you're thinking about that as you're running, or sometimes you're thinking about your work and creative processes come to you when you're running. I love that about running. Like it always gives me time to think about nothingness, or to have so much time to think about all the things. And so I actually found my dad accidentally, and I got the phone call about it while I was about to climb a hill in one of my long trail runs. I get a phone call from my uncle. So my mom had me when she was 18. Full disclosure, was conceived in the backseat of a car. My parents were, I think, at the bar that night, whatever. It was kind of like a one night stand hookup. But my dad was never in the picture. My mom's story was that she was pregnant with me, and my mom is Jamaican and my father is Canadian Italian. And so my mom tells the story of how she went to my father's house to basically tell his family that she was pregnant with his child. And my grandmother answered the door. And my mom said, although she was very kind, she was very afraid. She did not want her husband to find out, my grandfather. And in so many words, she just said that like her husband is racist and that this cannot be known. I'm sorry, but we basically can't help you. And so my grandmother told my mom, don't worry about it. You have all the support you're going to need. we don't need them. And that was it. And so that was the story. And my mom tried a few more times to like find him and locate him when she gave birth to me, but he just kind of kept flying under the radar and avoiding it. And so fast forward, I'm on the trails running. I'm about to climb a hill. I get this phone call at age, I would have been like 32 or 33. And it's my uncle calling me. And I was like, my uncle never calls me. He texts me usually. And so I was like, oh no, something must be wrong. So he calls me and he's like, hey, something really weird happened last night. And I'm just calling you because I was at a bar last night and I started talking to this guy sitting next to me at this bar. And I realized that I know this guy and that we're connected. And I was like, okay. And he's like, well, I found your dad. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah. And he's like, we're talking and realized we went to the same high school, know the same people, blah, blah, blah. And then my uncle, who's a very dark-skinned Jamaican, turns to my father, who's a very light-skinned Italian, and says to him, we're related. And my father was like, excuse me? And this is my uncle's, yeah, my uncle's story. My uncle's like, you know what I'm talking about. And I'm going to go to the bathroom right now. And if you're a man, you're still going to be sitting there when I get back. And so my uncle tells the story of how he went to the bathroom. He kind of was like freaking out. He had to gather himself. He comes back and my father's still sitting there. And then he just says, my father basically says like, well, if this is true, I would like to talk to her and stuff. And so my uncle calls me and he goes, I didn't want to just give him your phone number. So I'm calling you to tell you this because I don't want to overwhelm you. But he's like, I wanted permission to give your phone number out if that's what you want. And I was just like, ton of brick in the face. Like, what the heck, dude? Like, I'm 32, 33 years old. I've always wondered, does my dad care I exist? And here's my moment. And so that is literally how I found my dad. And this is all at the cusp of me beginning the early season training for my very first 100K. And so I'm kind of discovering all of this during my preliminary training season for my very first 100K. And I was just getting to know my dad, and we hadn't physically met yet. We just had sort of been building this relationship on the phone, and we were planning to meet, and then he just totally disappears. And I remember using the trail running and the training for my 100K as kind of the same outlet that I used when I had to, deliver my stillborn daughter. It was like, I'm in a lot of pain right now, and the only thing I know how to do with it is run it out. So that's what I did. And I ended up placing on the podium for my first 100K. And I really attest that podium finish to just like my grieving process of, I literally poured my entire whole self into that training season and emptied myself into it and really found my healing and my overcoming. And, I think that podium finish was just like the universe's way of being like, hey, we can overcome this grief. And like, you did it. There are days when you don't feel like getting out of bed or you don't feel like showing up to life, but you do anyways. And that's kind of what it was for me with running. It was like, I'm going through this in life, and it might have been a little bit of an escapism for me. I maybe didn't want to feel all the things. And so running was distractionary for me. But I actually just think it was so interwoven in the everyday routine of my life, thank God, that I had built that for myself in my early 20s, that running was like a part of my fabric every day. It was like getting up and drinking a glass of water. I just always exercised, right? Like since I was 19. And so that routine that I had invested in my 20s and built into myself was the thing in my 30s that just allowed me to keep showing up for myself. And the results of that race, I remember thinking in my 100K, when I crossed the 50K line, I remember getting that extreme wall of exhaustion, or to the point where I just needed somebody to hand me a cup of coffee. Like, okay, I just ran 50K. I paced it well. I got another 50K to go. I'm so tired. I remember my coach saying, you probably need a jolt of caffeine. And somebody handed me a really nice cup of black coffee, and it just like surged right through my body. And it felt like I was fresh at the 50K mark, and I just went on with it. And it was like, that reminded me of how I was arrested at 15 for assaulting a family member who happened to be my abuser, who I happened to assault because I was tired of taking the abuse one day and I snapped. And I should never have been there. I should never really have been arrested, but I did what I had to do. It allowed me to move on with my life and be put in the hands of a better caregiver. And it was like, we've been here before, Chantel. Like, we've been tired before. we've been brought down in life before. We've had these challenges before. Let's just get up and let's just keep going. Like, that's literally what I say to myself when I'm racing. I do a little self-talk in third person. It's like, "Hey, Chantel, like, come on, girl, like, let's go. Like, you're tired, but we've been here before. Like, this hurts, but you've hurt before." Like, it's always reminding myself of what I've overcome before that keeps me pushing forward. I can only really look forward because I don't have time to look behind me. I have to be in the moment and look forward. And the only reason to look behind me is to remind myself of what I know I'm capable of. And that is the beauty of using running as a form of self-healing. And the more I look back, running has been my healing. And having grown up in a family that has mental health challenges, I really, truly believe that I was able to escape a lot of that because of the sport of running. It is it is like a medicine for me. I feel like running gave me a major leg up in life to just push forward and to soar to new heights. I really believe that.
And not only does Chantelle continue to soar to new heights herself, but she's also helping so many other women do the same. Thank you so much, Chantelle, for everything you do in the running world. And also thank you so much for sharing your story on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. That does bring us to the end of Chantel Erickson's story on Women's Running Stories. But you can join me in keeping up with Chantelle and learning more about her through social media and her website, and I will provide links to how you can do that in the show notes. I also want to thank Adam Lee once again for introducing me to Chantelle. I'll also provide a link to how you can find the Community Trail Running podcast, and you can tune in there and hear more from Chantelle on that podcast as well. Also, a reminder that you can find a link to the Women's Running Stories newsletter in the show notes. Check it out, subscribe. A new newsletter will be coming out in just a couple days on Thursday. And thank you so much for being here. I always appreciate you coming here and listening to Women's Running Stories. Yeah, thank you. And that's going to do it for me. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I'm the host and producer of Women's Running Stories. And until next Tuesday, I do wish you healthy, joyful strides forward. Women's Running. Women's Running Stories.
Hear Her Sports is a podcast for everyone who loves stories by and about women striving to improve and make a difference in their lives. I am your host, Elizabeth Emery, a former professional cyclist. In every episode, I introduce a female athlete or woman in the business of sport through a thoughtful conversation about who they are and the terrific work they're doing. My guests and I explore the glorious and frustrating issues in sports, history, equity, training, nutrition, and so much more. Join us for inspiration, for community, and for love of being a strong, athletic woman.